Hello, y'all, and today we
are going to be doing this thing. I am Ayla Family on my YouTube channel, but I'm not going to be filming, so I'm going to be filming with him. And he's going to call me Pumpkin, while I'm going to call him Nickels, because that is how we go.
okay. So today is a continuation of the election series. If you're new to the series, don't start here. Don't start.
Don't.
Go to part 1 first.
Yay! Part
and then watch part 2, and then come to here.
Part 1 and part 2 are actually pretty long.
Part 1's only half an hour, and part 2's only 15 minutes. Anyway, 20 minutes, sorry. Anyways, let's get started. I'm planning for this one to be stupid long.
So, an hour and a half?
2 hours is the time I've set for myself. And
maybe we go for 3.
Alright, and no, because his bedtime's 9, which is in 2 hours. Okay, let's get started.
Mr. Beat presents Presidential Elections in American History. The 12th presidential election in American history took place from Friday, November 2nd to Wednesday, December 5th, 1832. President Andrew Jackson, seeking re-election of course, was very popular during his first term, while not so popular with his vice president, John Calhoun, who would resign shortly after the election over differences relating to tariffs that hurt his home state of South Carolina and several other personal reasons. Well before this, Jackson knew he had to find a new vice president to run for re-election with him, and the Democratic Party chose the dude who pretty much built the Democratic Party, Martin Van Buren. Sure, Jackson was popular with most of the people, but many in Congress disagreed with him on issues like his support for Indian removal, the spoils system, and getting rid of the Electoral College. The biggest issue in 1832 seemed to revolve around the renewing of the charter of the Second Bank of the United States. Congress passed it. Jackson, not a fan of central banking and paper money in general, vetoed the renewal of the bank's charter, withdrew federal deposits from the bank, of the United States. Congress passed it. Jackson, not a fan of central bank.
The irony.
Like, seriously, the irony.
Jackson did not like paper money, and yet they put him on the $20 bill.
Stupid.
The irony. Jackson's stupid anyway. He deserves to be on something he doesn't like.
Yep.
Anyways,
I think he's poo-poo.
Let's continue.
Banking and paper money in general, vetoed the renewal of the bank's charter, withdrew federal deposits from the bank, and redistributed them to private banks throughout the country. Jackson had a habit of vetoing a lot of legislation Congress passed, actually. Needless to say, opponents of Jackson's aggressive use of veto power called him King Andrew. They argued that not renewing the national bank would have devastating effects on the American economy. But Jackson convinced many ordinary Americans that by being against the national bank, he was just defending them against the privileged elite who wanted to keep the power to themselves. Jackson's opponents were led by, you guessed it, Henry Clay. Clay accepted the nomination to run against Jackson for the newly formed National Republican Party. Another name for that party could have been, quote, the People Who Hate Andrew Jackson Party. John Sargent,
This is the example of back then of the modern two pieces of shit running against each other. Of the modern.
That is funny.
It is.
from Pennsylvania, was Clay's running mate this time. This was the first presidential election in American history in which a notable third party had a candidate on the ticket. The Anti-Masonic Party was created to oppose the Freemasons, who they perceived as corrupt and elitist. That sounds familiar. They called out both Clay and Jackson as being associated with Freemasonry.
I don't care about Freemasonry. Just get on to whoever the hell this party endorsed.
And also,
The party held the first national nominating convention in American history. Many wanted Richard Rush as their nominee, but he declined. John Quincy Adams was interested, but many party leaders thought the former president was just too unpopular. The anti-Masonic Party ended up choosing William Wirt as their presidential candidate, despite the fact he was a Freemason. Crazy. Amos Ellmaker from Pennsylvania was his running mate. Can you tell Pennsylvania was an important state in this election? A fourth candidate, John Floyd from Virginia, was supported by the newly formed Nullifier Party, even though he didn't officially run for president. The Nullifier Party was basically a bunch of people in South Carolina upset about Jackson's support.
Alright, well, I see the Nullifier Party as invalid because of South Carolina's stupid Jackson unsupport thing.
But those two men, the other two men except for William Jackson,
his name was William Wirt.
Except for William Wirt, both of those two are poo-poo and they should have drowned.
I don't think they should have drowned.
But those two are poo-poo.
But Jackson and Clay are truly two pieces of shit. My vote is going to William Wirt.
They should have... my vote is so going to William Wirt, excuse me, but those two should have been flushed down the toilet like poops. They are.
There was no such thing as toilets at the time.
I know. But they should have been dubbed in a hole. They are pieces of poop because they are pieces of poop.
They are pieces of shit. Anyways, let's continue.
Support for increased tariffs that hurt the state. And here are the results. Andrew Jackson easily won re-election, receiving 219 electoral votes. He also got 54.2% of the popular vote, which is notable because no president was again able to get a majority of the popular vote in 2 consecutive elections.
Now, here I am extremely upset that Jackson won, because I've hated Jackson over the past 4 years.
Me too!
But I don't like Andrew Jackson, but you have your right to have your own opinion on that.
Andrew Jackson is pieces of shit who should have been thrown away and buried.
Well, he did do some good things in the Battle of New Orleans, but his decisions...
Besides that, he's poop.
Besides that, Jackson is very much a piece of shit.
And I go to, William Jack Sparrow.
His name's William Wirt.
William Wirt.
Anyway,
I'm
gonna stop Mr. Beat in his tracks and go on to the election of 1836.
Me too.
We're a community of over...
Stupid ad.
Why do you think I muted system sound?
We're the largest...
Stupid ad.
Mr. Beat presents Presidential Elections in American History. The 13th presidential election in American history took place from Thursday, November 3rd to Wednesday, December 7th, 1836. Andrew Jackson? Oh, he gone. He decided to follow in the footsteps of Washington, Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe and retire after 2 terms.
Thank God he gone.
Besides, he was confident his vice president of the past 4 years, Martin Van Buren, would do just fine in his place, especially since Van Buren shared many of the same views as Jackson. With Jackson's backing and the fact that Van Buren helped start the Democratic Party, it was no surprise the Democratic Party nominated him. They also nominated Richard Mentor Johnson, congressman from Kentucky, as his running mate. Johnson wasn't too popular with Southerners, however, because he had an affair with an African-American woman and fathered 2 daughters with her. 5 years prior, a bunch of people who were disturbed by how much Andrew Jackson had expanded the power of the executive branch organized. They were led by, you guessed it, Henry Clay, a dude who constantly criticized Jackson. After they couldn't defeat Jackson in 1832, they started to gain momentum as a new political party, the Whig Party, in the years following the election. I have an entire video about the Whig Party. Go watch it now. Are you done? Good. In 1834, the Whigs began to find success in the midterm elections. By 1836, they were a major party and a major threat to Jacksonian dominance. They had a crazy strategy for this presidential election. Instead of running one candidate like political parties usually do, they ran 4 different candidates in different parts of the country, hoping each would be popular enough to defeat Van Buren in each region. The 4 Whig candidates were Hugh Lawson White, Senator from Tennessee; Willie Person Mangum, Senator from North Carolina; Daniel Webster, Senator from Massachusetts; and former General Senator, Representative, and Governor William Henry Harrison from Ohio. It seemed to be more about Van Buren losing than the Whigs winning. This was the only time in American history this was ever tried. Stay tuned to see if it
Alright, so here's my stage. I'm
Can
extremely
I say who I vote for now, Nico?
Sure.
Wait, what was my vote again?
You voted for Willie Person Mangum.
I'm voting for Will Person Mangum.
Okay. I'm not mad if Willie Person Mangum wins. I'm not mad if Daniel Webster wins. You know what? Actually, I don't know. I should have Wikipedia up because I don't know too much about Hugh Lawson White. I should have Wikipedia already up. Come on. Wiki. Not Icky! Stupid keyboard. Wikipedia. Wikipedia, here we are. Ayla, don't. Ugh. Please don't. Anyway, I don't know too much about Hugh Lawson White. I don't think I'm voting for a candidate that I don't know much about.
I'm practicing.
I understand, but I'm muted a second. So let's see. He was a senator from Tennessee, president pro tempore of the United States. Okay. So, knowing the little I know about Hugh Lawson White, I'm not going to vote for him because I know so little about him. Instead, I'm going to toss my vote to William Henry Harrison.
We have the opposite vote. What make me mad?
Because William Henry Harrison's a noble dude who did some great things in the Battle of Tippecanoe back in 1811.
Can I have 2 votes, even though I'm not even allowed to have 2 votes?
He's a retired opponent.
Can I have 2 votes, even though I know I'm not allowed to have 2?
1 vote.
The other person who I would have voted for was William Henry Jackson.
William Henry Jackson! His name's William Henry Harrison.
William Henry Harrison was the other person that I would have voted for.
Okay, so let's continue
worked.
the video.
The Whigs ran 2 vice president candidates. John Tyler, senator from Virginia, ran with White and Mangum.
Screw vice presidential candidates. I'd like them both, and I don't care who wins. Now, because I didn't let the elections play, because I didn't let the results play, I'm going to tell it to you right here. Martin Van Buren won, which I am extremely upset about.
Me too!
Because Martin Van Buren is a huge supporter of Jackson and agreed with him on many issues. And in 1840, Now we know Martin Van Buren absolutely destroyed the economy.
Yeah, they both are poop.
With Andrew Jackson's help, of course. So keep
They're both poop.
keep that in mind as I'm voting in the next election.
Mr. Beat presents Presidential Elections in American History. The 14th presidential election in American history took place from Friday, October 30th to Wednesday, December 2nd, 1840. Martin Van Buren fought for re-election during a time when the economy was not doing so well. The country was in the middle of a horrible recession, which began as a financial crisis referred to as the Panic of 1837. Due to this, President Van Buren was unpopular. But you know who was more unpopular? His vice president, Richard Mentor Johnson. The Democratic Party actually refused to renominate him. In fact, they didn't officially nominate anybody. Although many wanted James Polk or Littleton Tazewell, the Whig Party, meanwhile, was gaining strength and learned their lesson from the last election, this time uniting behind one candidate for president, William Henry Harrison. Not only was Harrison a well-established politician, but, like Andrew Jackson, he was a bit of a war hero. Harrison's running mate was John Tyler, a former senator from Virginia. Harrison was the first candidate to actively campaign to be president. His supporters came up with a pretty catchy slogan, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Get it? Of course you don't. Well, basically, Tippecanoe referred to Harrison's military victory over the Shawnee Indians on November 7th, 1811 at the Battle of Tippecanoe. Because of this, the Whigs aggressively organized to promote him as a war hero. But the Democrats argued that Harrison was too old to be president. Many called him, quote, granny, implying that maybe he was senile. The Whigs fought back by portraying Martin Van Buren as a rich snob out of touch with the people, and Harrison as a man of the common people from the western frontier. In reality, it was Harrison who was richer than Van Buren, but most Americans wouldn't know that by the campaign. The election of 1840 was more about image and less about substance. In fact, the Whigs were just fine if Harrison didn't argue policy or about issues, because the country was pretty divided at the time. Instead, the Whig strategy was to avoid difficult national issues such as slavery and instead focus on how the Van Buren administration ruined the economy. Interestingly enough, the Anti-Masonic Party also nominated William Henry Harrison for president, but with Daniel Webster as his running mate instead of Tyler. Also, one notable third party, the Liberty Party, sprung up in 1840 with its primary goal to end slavery. They ran abolitionist James Birney for president and Thomas Earl as his running mate. And here are the results.
Call me Pumpkin.
Before the results play, Pumpkin, do you want to cast your vote first?
No, you said. Wait, actually, no, I will, Nichols.
Okay.
William Harrison Jackson.
His last name isn't Jackson. Yes, I am casting my vote for the same person, William Henry Harrison, as
William Henry Harry.
William Henry Harrison. Okay, anyway, let's let the results play.
I cannot.
William Henry Harrison won, becoming the 9th president of the United States. He received 234 electoral votes and won 52.9% of the popular vote. As a matter of fact, 42.4% of
So the only thing that
we are both Halloween, Boo Bear.
So here's the thing. We future me's talking. No, we know William Henry Harrison won, but little did we know when we voted for Harrison, he would die a month after taking office.
No!
And his vice president, John Tyler, would take over. John Tyler's not that.
Okay.
John Tyler's not that bad in my opinion.
Hold on. Pause it for real quick.
Yeah, what's up?
Mute this up. Listen carefully.
All eligible voters voted for him, the highest percentage in American history up to that time. Martin Van Buren finished second, receiving 60 electoral votes, but 46.8% of the popular vote. Van Buren was so unpopular, he even lost in his home state of New York. James
Over the past 6 months, we have been investigating as well as exposing the truth behind all of these food processing plants that have been catching on fire.
Mr. Beat presents Presidential Elections in American History. The 15th presidential election in American history took place from Friday, November 1st to Wednesday, December 4th, 1844. This was the last presidential election to be held on different days in different states. All future presidential elections would be held on a single day. President John Tyler had taken over after William Henry Harrison died, but he remained at odds with the Whig Party. The Whig Party actually stopped supporting him, and so did the Democratic Party, his old party.
Hey guys, do pineapple belong on pizza? Let us know in the comments because me and Boo Bear think that it's
Boo Bear?
I'm calling you Boo Bear.
It's
and you call
Nakoof.
me Pumpkin.
It's Nakoof, please.
Okay. Nick Oof and me think that it do belong on pizza. Leave it below in the comments.
Think I'm a monster? You think I'm a monster. I don't care. Anyways, let's continue with the video.
At odds with both of the major political parties in the country, he tried to start a third-party movement for re-election, hoping that many who agreed with him on the annexation of Texas would support him. The Texas annexation issue would divide not only the country, but the Democratic Party. Martin Van Buren, originally a shoo-in for the Democratic nomination in 1844, was against the annexation of Texas. However, many influential Southern Democrats, like John Calhoun and Andrew Jackson, wanted Texas. At the Democratic National Convention, 3 nominees were discussed at first: Van Buren, James Buchanan, a senator from Pennsylvania, and Louis Cass, the ambassador to France. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, came James Polk, a former governor of Tennessee and former Speaker of the House. Though Polk had originally entered the convention hoping to be the vice president nominee, by the end of the convention, he was the most popular guy in the room, getting the nomination unanimously. Polk famously became the first well-known, quote, dark horse candidate, meaning before the election, he was not well known. George Dallas, a former senator. After abandoning John Tyler, the party went back to the original Whig, Henry Clay, who was pretty much the leading Whig ever since the party began. Though Clay had run before for president and lost. He lost 3 times, actually. Things seemed to be going more his way this time, as he could appeal to both Southern slave owners who didn't want to annex Texas because it might make their land less valuable and slaves more expensive, and Northerners who didn't want slavery to expand further west. In 1840, the Whigs did quite well with Harrison, and with Clay, they just assumed it would be another blowout. The Whigs nominated Theodore Frelinghuysen, a former senator from New New Jersey as Clay's running mate. Things got a little more complicated when John Tyler dropped out of the running for re-election and threw his support to Polk. Also, the abolitionist Liberty Party ran James Birney again. His support had grown since 1840, and some worry that
You know what? I'm a little scared of James Polk at this point. I'm telling myself his rhetoric is telling me that he's gonna get us into a war. He's a little scary, and I don't know if I want him leading the country. But his competitor Henry Clay,
I'm voting for scary, creepy butthead.
James Polk.
He's scary though.
You know what? I'm voting for Polk because I've already explained earlier how I don't like Clay.
I'm scared of Polk though, but I'm still picking him.
Well, you know what? I'm gonna let the video play for you guys and have a personal conversation.
Northern Whigs might vote for him instead of Clay. So Clay was confident he would win at first, but as the election drew nearer, Polk's support had grown. Polk was all about manifest destiny, or the belief that it was the United States' destiny to expand from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. Polk wanted to expand the country's border whenever and wherever possible, and more Americans seemed to agree with him. Polk called for not only adding Texas, but also California and Oregon territory. The northern boundary of Oregon, which Britain claimed as well, was the latitude line.
I'm just gonna tell y'all, Polk won. I'm pretty happy about it.
Me too, but I'm still scared of him. I would not want to be alive in that.
But you know what? I'm gonna stop beating his tracks because
we need to go feed our bunny.
Imagine a world.
And I will be right back. Hello, guys. Thank you for waiting that 5 minutes or a second for you because I paused the film. Let's go on with the video.
Yeah.
Mr.
With
Beat
the election of
presents
1848.
Presidential Elections in American History. The 16th presidential election in American history took place on Tuesday, November 7th, 1848. This was the first election that took place on the same day in every state. By law, from this point forward, Election Day would be on a Tuesday. James Polk had spent the past 4 years kicking butts and taking names. Every major objective he had going into office was accomplished. He had got half of Oregon without going to war with Britain, got the northern half of Mexico by bullying them into a war, he reduced the tariff, and he created an independent treasury. Satisfied with accomplishing his goals, he promised not to run for re-election. His health was actually declining anyway, and he would die of cholera 3 months after leaving office, having the shortest retirement of all presidents in American history. In his place, the Democratic Party nominated Lewis Cass, who since 1844 had become a senator for Michigan. Cass beat out Martin Van Buren for the nomination, who was no longer having luck with the political party he helped create. The Democrats nominated William Orlando Butler to run with Cass, a general who had recently fought in the Mexican-American War. Martin Van Buren, upset and perhaps bitter at losing to Cass for the nomination, found a new political party, the Free Soil Party, led by Salmon P. Chase and John Parker Hale. Mostly based out of New York, the party called for ending the expansion of slavery out west. Most of their support came from anti-slavery.
Telling you one thing, y'all. I'm not voting for Martin Van Buren.
Me either. He's trash.
He is trash.
He should go in the dump.
Due to both the fact that he's apolitical and that he's more exciting as a Mexican-American war general, I'm voting Zachary Taylor.
Me too. Zachary Taylor.
I mean, Lewis. I'm not mad if Lewis Cass wins at this point because he's. I think he would lead the country all right, but
he's a good boy, just like you, Nickel.
Really?
Hee.
Anyway, yeah, I'm casting my vote for Zachary Taylor. with his running mate Millard Fillmore. Please stop that. We're so I'm gonna let the results play.
Zachary Taylor won, becoming the 12th president of the United States. This was the Whig Party's second and last presidential win, but they would remain a force for several years. Taylor received 163 electoral votes. Lewis Cass received 127 electoral votes. Martin Van Buren and Garrett Smith didn't receive any. Taylor received 47.3% of the popular vote to Cass's 42.5%, Van Buren's 10.1%, and Smith's 0.1%. Millard Fillmore became the 12th vice president in American history. This was the first of two presidential elections where the two leading candidates evenly split the states for the electoral vote. Historian George Pierce Garrison wrote of this election, quote, "Practically the only thing it decided was that a Whig general should be made president because he had done effective work in carrying on a Democratic war." Had Taylor ran as a
In case you guys didn't, I believe we did not say who we voted for, but it was Zachary Halo.
Taylor.
Halo!
Zachary Taylor.
Oh, would you rather me say Halo?
No. Anyways, I'm gonna stop beating his trucks. Ayla, can you scoot over, please?
Hey, I'm Pumpkin!
I know. I'm sorry. So I'm gonna stop Mr.
Nicky.
beating his tracks once again and go to the election of 1852.
I'm a Milo, and he's Nicky.
Mr. Beat presents Presidential Elections in American History. The 17th presidential election in American history took place on November 2nd, 1852. You might call this election the election of 1844 Part 2 because it was very similar to it. Just like in 1844, a young dark horse candidate won. Also like in 1844, the incumbent president was a Whig who had become president after the death of his war hero predecessor. And that Whig didn't get his party's nomination for the next election. In 1852, that Whig was Millard Fillmore, who took over after Zachary Taylor died in 1850. The biggest national issue during Taylor and Fillmore's presidencies was the expansion of slavery out in Western territories. The Compromise of 1850, had helped ease tensions a bit, but it really just kicked the can down the road. The country was becoming further divided between Northerners and Southerners over slavery. You know what else was divided? The Whig Party. They had a hard time deciding who their nominee for the 1852 election would be. Many favored Fillmore, but many others favored Mexican-American war hero Winfield Scott, Old Fuss and Feathers himself. Even others favored Secretary of State Daniel Webster. In the end, it was Old Fuss and Feathers, Winfield Scott, who would get the nomination. William Alexander Graham, the Secretary of the Navy and former governor and senator from North Carolina, would be his running mate. The Democratic Party had at least 9 candidates who were all fighting to get nominated. At their convention, 4 major candidates stood out. Lewis Cass, who won the nomination in 1848, James Buchanan, the former Secretary of State and Senator from Pennsylvania, Stephen Douglas, a Senator from Illinois, and William L. Marcy, the former Secretary of War. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, comes another dark horse candidate for the Democrats, Franklin Pierce, a 48-year-old former senator and representative
Alright, Frank, I'm not liking Franklin Pierce because, he's a supporter of slavery. And so I'm voting again for the apolitical candidate, the one who's not discussing political issues. And that candidate is Winfield Scott.
Winfield Scott.
And do not eat.
Nikki, you heard me? Lizzie, stop.
And here are the results. Franklin Pierce won in a landslide, becoming the 14th president of the United States. Oh, Pierce kicked butt, all right. He received 254 electoral votes, and Winfield Scott only received 42. Pierce received 50.8% of the popular vote, and Scott received just 43.9%. John P. Hale came in third with 4.9% of the popular vote. All other candidates received much less than 1% of the popular vote. Daniel Webster, the Union Party and unofficial Native American Party candidate,
Imagine a world where healthcare is not a privilege,
Mr. Beat presents Presidential Elections in American History. The 18th presidential election in American history took place on November 4th, 1856. Franklin Pierce had a pretty rough time over the previous 4 years and now struggled to get his own party's renomination. At the Democratic Party's convention, 4 main candidates were in the running: Pierce, James Buchanan, Little Giant himself, Stephen Douglas, and the beautiful Lewis Cass. It was a tight race between 4 well-established and qualified candidates. In the end, Buchanan won the nomination. His running mate was John C. Breckinridge, a former U.S. representative from Kentucky. By this time, the Whig Party had mostly collapsed. Most former Whigs had joined either the Know Nothing Party or a brand new political party called the Republican Party. The Republican Party was formed in 1854 to oppose the extremely controversial Kansas-Nebraska Act. At the first Republican National Convention in June of 1856, they met to approve an anti-slavery platform, an end to polygamy in Mormon settlements, and federal aid for a transcontinental railroad. Their nominee for president was John C. Fremont, a former senator from California, although Supreme Court Justice John McLean from Ohio was in the running. Fremont's running mate was William L. Dayton, a former senator from New Jersey. The American Party, formerly the Native American Party, and nicknamed the Know Nothing Party, by this time had gained much support for their nativist platform. Nativism is the policy of protecting the interests of native citizens against foreigners. And the American Party mostly targeted Irish Catholics, who they complained were hurting the country. Even though former President Millard Fillmore was not a member of the American Party, nor was he a nativist, and he never attended an American Party.
Slavery has become a major issue in the country, and I am against slavery. I think slavery is
Trash.
Oh no!
for the lack of a better term.
Guys,
And
who unplugged the
and
Not me.
not me.
Maybe Joe.
No, I don't think he said me. Fuck.
Okay,
It may have gone bad.
just a second.
It's still warm.
Okay, so I don't.
If it's still warm, that means you.
Slavery has become a major issue in the country, and I am against slavery at this point. So in that case, I am not voting for James Buchanan because he is for slavery. I am voting for John Fremont, the anti-slavery candidate with the new Republican Party. So I'm going to let the results play out, and then I will go on to the election of 1860, which is one of my favorite elections to look at.
And here are the results. James Buchanan won, becoming the 15th president of the United States, despite not receiving a majority of the vote. He received 174 electoral votes and 45.3% of the popular vote. John C. Fremont finished pretty strong for a new political party. He received 114 electoral votes and 33.1% of the popular vote. Millard Fillmore came in third, receiving 8 electoral votes, so the state of Maryland, and 21.5% of the popular vote. John C. Breckinridge became the 14th vice president in American history. The success of the Republican Party was troublesome for many Southerners. After this election, the country seemed to be just hanging on, trying desperately to stay unified. By the next presidential election, a civil war was much more of a reality than just a talking point.
Cheeks were in the bloom. Now I stand.
I'll see you for the next election, buddy.
Guys, I know you think all those puzzle ads are fake, but today I finally found the game. Ebony.
Mr. Beat presents Presidential Elections in American History. Who knew that a presidential election could directly lead to war? The 19th presidential election in American history took place on November 6th, 1860. Hey, that is my birthday! Well, if I was alive back then. Anyway, yeah, this presidential election was kind of sort of, okay, it was a big freaking deal. As I said before, the United States had been growing more divided throughout the 1850s over the issue of the expansion of slavery out west and the rights of slave owners. In 1860, tensions were obviously high, not only between Democrats and Republicans, but within the Democratic Party. At the Democratic National Conventions, notice how that was plural, extreme pro-slavery, quote, fire eaters walked out in protest. No, they weren't dragons. They were nicknamed fire eaters because they refused to compromise on slavery to a point where they wanted to secede and start their own country. They ended up being known as the Southern Democratic Party, as most of them were Southerners, and nominated their own candidates. Those Democrats who remained nominated Stephen Douglas, who by this time was very well known across the country as a moderate on the slavery issue, who favored a thing called popular sovereignty. Benjamin Fitzpatrick was nominated for vice president, but he refused the nomination. So they nominated Herschel Johnson instead, the former governor of Georgia. So they were the nominees for what became known as the Northern Democratic Party. Meanwhile, the Southern Democratic Party got together again and nominated current Vice President John C. Breckinridge for president and Joseph Lane, a senator from Oregon, as his running mate. Wait, Oregon? Oregon's a state now? Heck yeah. But
What is it?
No, not
Pumpkin.
Joseph. Who?
Joseph Lane?
Joseph Lane is a very smart but also ugly boy.
Joseph Lane is the farthest thing from smart. I don't like Joseph Lane. Anyway,
Joseph Lane
next
is stupid and ugly.
next set of candidates.
Hold on, it's not done. Nichols.
Well, the video's also not done, so.
I know, but still, let me finish Nichols.
Fine.
Joseph who?
Joseph Lane.
Joseph Lane is a big fat liar.
He's not even fat, but he is a liar.
Yes, he is fat. In fact,
That man
I've
is not
noticed
fat.
something between all the presidents. So far, we have not ran into a single fat one. Do you guys, other than the one that other than the one Nick Goof is about to say.
Well, Pumpkin, we do run into heavier set presidents later on.
Yeah, but we haven't run into any right now.
No, we haven't.
And
What?
I think that is.
Are you calling the presidential elections weightist?
Yes. So far, the presidential
We elect William Taft.
bad boy.
Don't spin me. Anyways, next set of candidates.
No!
Yes.
Don't mute! Don't mute! Don't mute!
Stop it. I'm trying
Don't
to.
mute!
Ayla.
Stop with this behavior. I am trying to film a video. Ayla, listen, please.
It's my channel, and I'm not gonna let you talk for this long because this is a long series as it is, and I don't want to make it any longer than it needs to be. And stop eating my shit. Next.
Both Oregon and Minnesota were now states and got to participate in this election for the first time. Oh yeah, James Buchanan, the current president, remember he was a Democrat, wasn't even brought up as a nominee for re-election. That shows you just how unpopular he was. The Republican Party, now stronger than they were in 1856, had 4 top contenders for their nomination. William Seward, a senator from New York, mostly because he was the most moderate of the 4 I mentioned. The Republicans chose Hannibal Hamlin, a senator from Maine, as his running mate. To further complicate this election, there were other nominees. Former Whigs who wanted to avoid the country splitting up over the slavery issue created a new political party called
You know
the
what?
Constitutional Union.
I'm not liking the. And don't eat my stuff again. I am not liking slavery at this point still. So
Slavery is stupid.
so I am
Just like
so
just
I
like Joseph.
Joseph Lane.
Just like Joseph Fat Asshole. Lane.
Anyway, I'm putting my vote in for Abraham Lincoln.
Me too. I love Abraham Lincoln. If I was a grown adult and Abraham Lincoln was still exist, I would have married him.
Anyway, next I'm gonna
So I would be powerful in it. But I said
I'm
for
gonna
life.
skip to the results.
Skip. Up.
Were high in this one, and here are the results. Although he won less than 40% of the popular vote, Abraham Lincoln won, becoming the 16th president of the United States. While this election had the second highest voter turnout in American history, it was very sectional. For example, the 3 states with the highest voter turnouts voted the most one-sided. Looking at this map, you can easily tell how if you lived in a certain part of the country, chances are you were voting for the same candidate as your region or state. The South was a little less united than the North in who they voted for, though. Abraham Lincoln, who today is considered by most to be the best American president in history, in 1860 only had support of mostly Northerners. He did receive an impressive 180 electoral votes, though, as the North Mr. Beat presents Presidential Elections in American History. Who cares if the southern half of the country split off and it's been fighting a very bloody war against it ever since? Let's have an election. The 20th presidential election in American history took place on November 8th, 1864, right smack dab during the Civil War. So yeah, Americans were a bit preoccupied. By the summer of 1864, the North, aka the Union, had gained momentum. The South, aka the Confederate States of America, was retreating, yet were not showing signs of giving up. Hundreds of thousands had already died. Even though the Union won the Battle of Gettysburg and the Siege of Vicksburg the previous summer, they had lost over 65,000 soldiers that summer to do it. In comparison, they had lost 108,000 during the entire war up to that point. Many Northerners were growing tired of the war. Those who originally were excited about the war now questioned the point of it. They were also questioning the president himself, the man who led them into it, Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln was questioning his ability to get reelected, and rightly so. The country hadn't reelected a president since Andrew Jackson 32 years prior, way back in 1832. Lincoln had made many enemies, especially in Congress. He now openly embraced the emancipation of all slaves, and even Northerners turned against him because of this. Lincoln's suspension of the writ of habeas corpus was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. Obviously, this war had been a nightmare, and the stress had aged him considerably. Two distinct factions developed in both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. First, the Republicans. Well, some Republicans who didn't like Lincoln split off. They called themselves, quote, radical Republicans, and formed a new political party called the Radical Democracy Party. Whoa, what a radical name. The Radicals nominated John C. Fremont for president and General John Cochrane for vice president, but their plan backfired as Fremont later ended up backing Lincoln after he was afraid the Democrats might win. More on the Democrats in a bit. The other Republicans formed a new political party as well, called the National Union Party. Some Democrats even joined. They had a clear, impressively specific platform. They wanted, quote, pursuit of the war until the Confederacy surrendered unconditionally, a constitutional amendment for the abolition of slavery, aid to disabled Union veterans, continued European neutrality, enforcement of the Monroe Doctrine, encouragement of immigration, and construction of a transcontinental railroad, unquote. Lincoln wanted to go with a new running mate this time, dropping Hannibal Hamlin, sorry Hannibal, to broaden his support. He went with a Democrat. That's right, a Democrat. The National
So here's the thing. I don't like Abraham Lincoln's running mate, Andrew Johnson, because, I'm happy that Johnson stayed with the Union and didn't go off and form his own country. But he's also still for slavery. But
Wait, Abraham Lincoln wanted slavery?
no, his running mate, Andrew Johnson, did. Lincoln only picked Andrew Johnson because he wanted the country to know that he was willing to compromise. Now, FYI to the video,
Yeah,
I don't know what's gonna happen. I don't know Lincoln's gonna be assassinated. I don't know that. All I think is that Johnson's gonna be the vice president of the United States for the next 4 years. It's what I think.
Wait,
I don't know Lincoln's gonna be assassinated. I don't know.
I don't either, but I think he is going to be assassinated.
But yeah, I'm gonna skip forward to the election. My vote is cast for Lincoln anyway, because
My vote is wait. What is his last name?
who's the Abraham Lincoln?
Huh?
His name is Abraham Lincoln. His
So
first
Ham?
name is Abraham. His last name is Lincoln.
So Abraham
Lincoln, like Lincoln Loud.
Lincoln.
Whatever. Either way, let's let the results play, and then
So Lincoln.
I'll be on with the election of 1868.
No, let the results play. But I'm Abraham Lincoln.
know this, but Abraham Lincoln won. It was a landslide. Lincoln received 212 electoral votes and 55% of the popular vote. Andrew Johnson became the 16th vice president in American history. George McClellan received 21 electoral votes and 45% of the popular vote. He won just 3 states, Kentucky, Delaware, and his home state of New Jersey. Lincoln was the first incumbent president re-elected since Andrew Jackson. By the time he was inaugurated on March 4th, 1865, the Union forces were closing in on the Confederate leader, Robert E. Lee. Things were looking good for the Union, but Lincoln tragically became the first American president to be assassinated just 5 weeks later. I have a pretty darn solid video explaining that, and you should check it
I will
out
not
here.
be playing that video on this series.
Go ahead. Yeah. But the Civil
But let me know in the comments if you want that video.
Hey, by the way, I was correct. You were wrong.
About
Abraham Lincoln being assassinated.
yes, because we know in the future Lincoln got assassinated. We can't make predictions based on what we already know. Basically, all I'm like. I'm going to stop Mr. Beaton's tracks, and I'm going to go on to the election of 1868, where our options are pretty good. Our options
Eve
are
to me
Horace
is
Greeley
basically freedom. It's a
versus
giant open universe where
Elizabeth
you can do
Warren.
whatever
And
you
no,
want.
I'm not. Let me
Mr.
let-
Beat presents Presidential Elections in American History. The 21st presidential election in American history took place on November 3rd, 1868. It was the first one to take place after the Civil War, and the first to take place during a period historians refer to as the Reconstruction era. The country was still healing. The wounds were still fresh. 3 of the former Confederate states, Texas, Mississippi, and Virginia, hadn't even yet been officially brought back into the Union. Andrew Johnson had taken over as president after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Now, he didn't even get renominated by the Democratic Party. He had managed to make a lot of people mad during his presidency, especially the radical Republicans, who favored a stricter Reconstruction policy, which punished former Confederate leaders and promoted equal rights for African Americans. Every time Johnson vetoed one of their Reconstruction bills, they overrode his vetoes. Things got ugly. In fact, Johnson was the first president ever impeached for breaking the Office of Tenure Act. Although he wasn't kicked out of office by just one vote, I might add, his reputation was badly hurt after this. So yeah, the Democratic Party was like, let's get somebody else. They found Horatio Seymour, who absolutely did not want to be the nominee. Seriously, it was crazy. I have never seen someone so...
Guys, I am so sorry. I was thinking about the 1872 election, spoiler alert, when I said Horace Greeley. This year it's Horatio Seymour. He's also an amazing dude. Mr. Beadle will explain a little bit about him. But he
I think everyone except for Abraham Lincoln.
You mean Andrew Johnson at this point?
No, Abraham Lincoln. And
Lincoln's dead at this point.
I know.
Lincoln's dead.
I wish that he was still alive so I could smooch him on the lip.
No more inappropriate references, and next thing.
I was just joking. I wouldn't have.
My vote is going to Horatio Seymour. Because Ulysses Grant is, even though he's a great general, I don't think he knows what he's doing. I really don't. And
Oh, wow. But watch, the person who you didn't vote for wins. I'm just making a
badly not want the nomination actually get it. Seymour was the former governor of New York and was the Democratic Party convention chairman. He repeatedly told everyone there he didn't want the nomination, but everyone there couldn't passionately get behind someone other than Seymour. So he finally accepted. The Democrats nominated Francis Blair, a former representative and Civil War general from Missouri, for vice president. Meanwhile, the Union Party was once again the Republican Party. It was important for the party to nominate a popular Civil War hero as their candidate. Fortunately, General Ulysses Grant, who just so happened to be the hero who helped the North win the Civil War, announced to everyone he was a Republican. He was unanimously nominated on the first ballot. The Republicans nominated Schuyler Colfax, the Speaker of the House, for vice president. Colfax, who represented Indiana, was one of those radical Republicans I mentioned earlier that clashed with Andrew Johnson. It had appeared it would be a close race. In Grant's letter of acceptance, he said, quote, "Let us have peace." That ended up becoming like a slogan for his campaign. The radical Republicans ended up being loudest on the campaign trail, even though Grant was certainly not one himself. Seymour ran on a platform calling for the repayment of the war debt in greenbacks, a form of currency not backed by gold or silver. The campaigns turned a bit vicious. Grant supporters said Seymour would probably commit suicide because his dad did. Seymour supporters said Grant was a drunk. This was the first election in which African American men could vote, and because many white Southerners
yes, let me comment on that. I can verify that Grant was a drunk. He did.
What's a drunk mean?
He drank so much that, oh my god.
Oh, is this one of the fat people?
Grant's not very fat. But he's probably the heaviest set person we've seen so far, other than Andrew Johnson.
Look.
Southerners could not vote yet, this looked to give Grant the edge. Also, since the last election, Nebraska had been admitted to the Union, so they got to participate in a presidential election for the first time. Yay for them. And here are the results. Ulysses Grant won. He dominated with electoral votes, getting 214 electoral votes compared to Seymour getting 80. However, the popular vote was much closer. Grant won 52.7% of the popular vote, and Seymour got 47.3%. Schuyler Colfax became the 17th vice president in American history. Many Republicans were surprised.
So here's what I think. He's poop, but he's good.
Imagine a world where healthcare is not a privilege, but a human right.
Mr. Beat presents Presidential Elections in American History. The 22nd presidential election in American history took place on November 5th, 1872. It was the first election in which every state used a popular vote to determine its electors. Therefore, it felt like more of a democracy. For the most part, Ulysses Grant remained popular during his first term as president, especially with the majority of Republicans. He got his party's renomination. However, some Republicans did not like him so much. For one thing, they didn't like how Grant had a lot of friends in his cabinet and ignored merit.
As I thought, Grant doesn't know what he's doing, and
Grant is poo-poo.
He has some corrupt buddies that he doesn't know are corrupt, helping him, quote unquote, helping him out, even though, like, he thinks they're helping him out, but he's not. They're not. So he's a genuine dude, but I think that him leading the country isn't the best thing.
Poop.
Our alternative, Horace Greeley is
Holly.
Anyway, Horace Greeley is a good dude that will lead the country well, and so that's who I cast my vote for. But I will let Mr. Beat explain the parties, the candidates, and then I will skip to the results if there's anything in between, and then I will move on to the election of 1876.
How many hours are we closing in on?
We're already at an hour. So yeah, let's continue.
A lot of his friends, as it would turn out, were a bit corrupt. As a matter of fact, Vice President Schuyler Colfax was tied to the Credit Mobilier of America scandal, in which many politicians were bribed for actions favorable to the railroad company Union Pacific. It would be just one of several scandals tied to the Grant administration. After Colfax was implicated, the Republican Party decided it might not be such a good idea to renominate him, so they nominated Henry Wilson, the senator from Massachusetts, to be Grant's running mate instead. Still, some Republicans, like Charles Sumner, weren't satisfied. Sumner was sick of the favoritism Grant showed to friends and family, calling it, quote, Grantism. Some influential Republicans refused to support him and actually started a new political party called the Liberal Republican Party. Those dang liberal Republicans. They nominated Horace Greeley, a former representative from New York and a well-known editor for the New York Tribune, for president. A journalist running for president? Crazy. They nominated Benjamin Gratz Brown, the governor of Missouri, as his running mate. Now here's something interesting, a fusion or cross-endorsement nomination. The Democratic Party also decided to nominate Horace Greeley for president and Benjamin Gratz Brown for vice president. They even adopted the liberal Republican platform, showing that they were cool with Reconstruction policies. Really, though, the main reason why they decided to go with the liberal Republican nominees is because they wanted to take down Grant and knew by nominating different people, it would just split his opposition. How about some third parties? Well, there were at least 3 new ones. The Labor Reform Party tried to nominate a couple fellows, lawyer Charles O'Connor from New York and Supreme Court Justice David Davis, awesome name, from Illinois, but things just didn't work out. It was kind of doomed from the start. The two frontrunners, Grant and Greeley, were aggressively attacked. Grant for the corruption in his cabinet, and Greeley for being an eccentric guy for his support of spiritualism, aka communicating with the dead, vegetarianism, prohibition, and socialism, all radical ideas at the time. Greeley had a rough campaign and had the misfortune of a long history of positions published in his newspaper that opponents could just nitpick. Even his own supporters were disappointed with him. On top of that, his wife died right before the election. And here are the results. Ulysses Grant easily won re-election, receiving 286 electoral votes and 55.6% of the popular vote. Horace Greeley received 43.8% of the popular vote, but, he died.
This is a weird situation with Horace Greeley that I'd like to address.
I'm voting for Horace Greeley.
We already did. But during the electoral process, when the electoral people met up to count up the electoral votes, Horace Greeley died.
Wait, the people who we vote for?
No, the people who make up the electoral votes, when they made up to do that, Horace Greeley died.
So the person who we vote for?
Yeah.
No! I knew it was because he was drinking too much.
No, that was Ulysses Grant.
Oh.
Screwed. Grant dies in 1881 of the same reason. But that's later after his presidency. But yeah, let's continue on.
Yeah, before the Electoral College could meet, he died.
Tap out of the video?
Maybe.
Alright, well, I'm moving on to the election of
Remember the 90s?
I'm moving on.
Your computer could suddenly correct spelling mistakes. That was life-changing. Then came the
Mr. Beat presents Presidential Elections in American History. The 23rd presidential election in American history took place on November 7th, 1876. Boy, was this one controversial. Let's get right to it. President Ulysses Grant actually considered running for a third term, and he would have been the first to try, but he ultimately decided against it. This is probably a good idea since his administration continued to be accused of corruption and faced many scandals. Plus, the economy sucked. The country was in the middle of the Great Depression. Well, that's what they called it back then. After the real Great Depression happened in the 1930s, we now call this financial crisis the Panic of 1873. So Grant was smart to decide against seeking a third term, but who would take his place? When the Republican National Convention assembled, several candidates were on the ballot. James Blaine looked to be the early favorite, but many Republicans argued Blaine couldn't win the general election. Eventually, they settled with Rutherford Hayes, the governor of Ohio. Rutherford was another Civil War hero, having fought with bravery and even getting wounded 5 times during the war. He was known as a reformer. Plus, his beard was amazing. The Republicans chose...
Because I already know about the candidates, I am going to go ahead and cast my vote for Samuel Tilden, because even though I like Rutherford Hayes, I like the appeal.
I'm voting for Beethoven.
His name is Samuel Tilden.
I'm voting for Samuel Hazel.
Okay. Anyway, the reason I'm voting for Samuel Tilden is because I like the appeal of Rutherford Hayes.
I like
but
the name
voting for the incumbent party when the country's not doing so well isn't such a good idea. So I'm gonna go ahead and look to the Democrats and vote for Samuel Tilden. Oh, let me skip. Actually,
the reason why I'm voting for Beethoven is because I like the name of it. Because Beethoven is actually a famous music author.
Okay, so
I can't speak today.
So I'm gonna let Beat explain. I'm gonna skip to the results, and then I'm gonna move on to 1880.
I will probably be asleep by then.
Let's go.
William Wheeler, a representative from New York, as his running mate. The Democrats were feeling much better about their chances now that the economy was in ruins and Grant's friends had messed up the Republican image. They were fired up and passionately supported Samuel Tilden, the governor of New York. Tilden was known as a new type of Democrat, a bourbon Democrat. Bourbon Democrats were basically classical liberals who supported things like free trade and the gold standard and opposed things like imperialism. The Democrats nominated Thomas Hendricks, the governor of Indiana, as Tilden's running mate. So this election looked like a battle of governors. But wait, there's more. A new political party called the Greenback Party had emerged to offer a third option. They wanted inflation through printing paper money called greenbacks and were quite anti-monopoly. Bringing these two issues created an electoral commission to investigate and resolve the dispute. The commission had 5 U.S. representatives. Oh boy, we have a mess here. At first, it appeared as if Tilden was going to win. By midnight, he had 184 of the 185 electoral votes, and he led the popular vote by 250,000. Republicans called foul play, though, saying that in southern states, Democrats were using intimidation and bribery to get African Americans not to vote. Democrats also accused Republicans of not counting Tilden votes. But 20 electoral votes were disputed in 4 states: Florida, Louisiana, Oregon, and South Carolina. Congress created an electoral commission to investigate and resolve the dispute. The commission had 5 U.S. representatives, 5 senators, and 5 Supreme Court justices. 5 of the members of Congress were Democrat and 5 Republican. Of the 5 justices, 2 were Democrat and 2 Republican. And David Davis, the 5th justice, I mentioned him in the last episode actually, he was an independent. However, Democrats in the Illinois legislature elected Davis to the U.S. Senate in hopes that Davis would support Tilden. That plan backfired as David excused himself from the commission. Davis was replaced by Justice Joseph Bradley, hardly a political fellow, but still someone more aligned with the Republicans. And he would vote with them. Bradley's vote broke the tie along party lines, and in an 8-7 ruling, decided to award the disputed electoral votes to Hayes. This made so many people angry that some even talked about a second civil war. To make the Democrats happy, the Republicans agreed to.
I'm pretty angry at this point, not at the fact that Hayes won, but the fact of how he won, because he only got the exact majority of the vote, 185 out of 185. Tilden got 184 and won the popular vote by 250,000.
I would have voted for the other person who didn't win.
That's who we voted for.
I'm going to be falling asleep.
In 1876. Oh my god, it didn't type it. Just a second.
Nighty night.
Night. You won the vote of 250,000 people. And the population of the United States in 1876 was 45 million people only. And he won the popular vote by 250,000 of those people. That is insane. But I'm going to stop beating his tracks and go on to the 1880 election.
Guys, I know you think all those puzzle ads are fake. But today I finally found the game. Ebony.
Mr. Beat presents Presidential Elections in American History. The 24th presidential election in American history took place on November 2nd, 1880. Back in 1876, while running for president, Rutherford Hayes promised he would not seek a second term. Unlike Frank Underwood, Rutherford actually stayed true to his word. In 1880, he was leaving that job open for someone else. But who else? Well, Republicans had a hard time figuring out who would take his place. Republican leaders met in June in what would become the longest Republican National Convention in history. Two major factions within the Republican Party made the decision for a nominee a difficult one. One faction, the stalwarts, tended to revolve around New York Senator Roscoe Conkling. They generally favored a thing called patronage, also known as the spoils system, which basically said you should reward the people who got you elected. The other faction, the half-breeds, I know that sounds horrible. They got that name because their opponents called them only, quote, half-Republican, revolved around Maine Senator James Blaine. They generally did not like patronage, saying people should be appointed on merit alone and not by political favors or obligations. That was pretty much the only big issue dividing the Republicans, surprisingly. After deciding against it in 1876, Ulysses Grant shocked several people when he decided to run for a third term. Many Republicans were all for it, but he had opponents. One was the aforementioned James Blaine. There was also John Sherman, the brother of Civil War General William Tecumseh Sherman, a former senator from Ohio, and James Garfield, a representative from Ohio. It took a long time, but the Republicans nominated neither a stalwart or a half-breed in the end. They nominated a guy who definitely did not expect to get nominated, actually, James Garfield. Some of the stalwarts weren't so sure about Garfield, so Chester Arthur, a stalwart from New York, was nominated as his running mate. Under the shadow of Samuel Tilden's devastating defeat 4 years earlier, the Democrats held their convention soon after. The two leading candidates were Major General Winfield Scott Hancock of Pennsylvania and Thomas Bayard, a senator from Delaware. The Democrats finally had their war hero. Hancock served most of his life in the Army. He was
I'm casting my vote for James Garfield, knowing about both candidates, but I am going to let Mr. Beat explain before I get on to the election of 1884. Alright, because it's not loading, I'm gonna have to say goodbye for tonight.
Goodbye, see you tomorrow.
This has been the longest part of presidential election series so far. Hour and 16 minutes.
An hour and 23 minutes.
No, that's seconds.
Oh.
I'm gonna head off and stop recording. Alright, see y'all in the next one. Goodbye.
My glasses.